Hey, what's up, everybody? Isaac back here with you again, live reporting from San Francisco, California, in the Tenderloin district here on my break for my new channel, The Unorthodox Social Worker, where we do talk about all things social work from an unorthodox perspective. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you do like this type of content. And if you did want to know some further background information about myself, please check out one of my first two videos where I do go into more detail about my history as a social worker. So, off to the topic at hand. A very deep, a very complex, a very controversial topic. And that topic is, why are there so many homeless individuals in San Francisco, in the Bay Area? And remember, this is going to be from my point of view, from my experiences, from my perspective. Keep in mind, I've never been homeless. Perhaps in the future, I do want to interview a homeless individual and get their perspective. But this is coming from the perspective of someone who grew up in San Francisco in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. I've actually not worked in homeless services in San Francisco, but I have worked in homeless services in Alameda County and in California and the Bronx, New York. But I do have a general knowledge of San Francisco's homeless services. So the first reason, and this is not in any particular order, is the reason number one why I think that there are so many homeless in San Francisco is the cost of living. This is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, if you're from here, you already know, or maybe you've heard about it, that San Francisco is like one of the most expensive cities in the world to live in. The rent is insane. It's like probably, $3,000-$4,000 for a one bedroom, something like that. Food is expensive, gas is expensive. Everything is astronomically expensive. And I did read a stat, but don't quote me, that the majority, at least half of the homeless individuals in San Francisco were once residents of San Francisco at one point. So that could kind of show that it's definitely a factor that it's too expensive to live here. People may have been evicted, lost a job, had something like maybe an injury at work, loss of income, and boom, they are homeless. And it is so expensive here that I believe you can make up to like 70 grand a year, something like that, to be considered low income in San Francisco. So yeah, it's ridiculously expensive. Don't think that there's not a lot of money coming in, because in fact there is a lot of money coming in. I think San Francisco is number 2 recipient of HUD money, housing and urban development money, for homelessness, behind New York City. And in my opinion, it's not that the money's not there. We have plenty of money. It's just that the current subsidies, you're only allowed to pay a max amount of dollars for the rent. And we do live in a capitalist society, free market. So my issue is not that there's enough money being thrown at the problem. It's just that people in the free market will always be able to pay more than a voucher or a Section 8 voucher or any other type of subsidy. So it's not that there's not enough money. It's just that we cannot pay enough money per unit to compete with the free market, which goes into the next reason, beyond it being so expensive, why I do believe there is so many homeless in San Francisco, is the lack of housing. So keep in mind, this is a very small city. I believe it's the second most densely populated area in the country, behind Manhattan. We are a 7 by 7 mile, square mile area, so very small. There's a lot of restrictions and red tape on building up. And there's not a lot of land to build new housing. And I believe the mayor, London Breed, did acknowledge this, that there's something to do with zoning, that some areas you can only build single family homes as opposed to multi-unit apartments, and that a lot of these units, there's too much, they said, retail or commercial use permitting. There should be more housing in apartments permitted to be built in certain zones, while a lot of these places are only zoned for residential. So definitely the red tape of building new housing and affordable housing at that is another reason why there are so many homeless, I believe. If there's not enough housing, if there's not enough affordable housing, then of course there's going to be people on these streets. All right, so my next reason why I believe there are so many homeless, this is pretty obvious. This is the weather. Even though today it's kind of cold and rainy, it does really not get extreme here in San Francisco in the Bay Area. It is pretty much like a temperate climate. It's pretty much between like 50 and 80 all year round. So, you know, you can kind of come to the conclusion yourself that it is much more accommodating to live on the streets and be homeless in a place where the weather is, not very cold and you're not sitting out there freezing your buns off, or you are in a very hot place, possibly getting heat stroke, something like that. So that's self-explanatory. The weather is very accommodating for people living on the streets. And I just kind of want to circle back to, the part about where they did say the majority of homeless in San Francisco were living in San Francisco, but I do know certain periods of time, other cities have historically gotten homeless residents in their areas plane tickets or bus tickets to go to San Francisco to be, and then they end up here being homeless. And then I was talking to one of them who did get a 5150 in Monterey County, which is south of San Francisco, and I was just interested asking them questions. And I said, "Oh, was it a central mental institution, or did each hospital have their own mental institution?" He was telling me Monterey County has a just one central mental institution, but they only had 19 slots. And when the spaces get filled up, then they actually send their patients down to San Francisco. So it looks like Monterey County and probably other counties are sending their 5150 mental health patients to San Francisco to be treated. And who knows, maybe they get discharged in San Francisco. So another factor could put, despite the fact that the majority of the people were homeless, that are homeless in San Francisco were from San Francisco, there are people being bused in, homeless people from other counties, states being sent to San Francisco to live on the streets. And I thought it was interesting, told me that the mental health system in Monterey County was sending patients to San Francisco for overflow. Who knows, maybe they get discharged in San Francisco and become homeless there. So there is people from other counties coming into this city, maybe because they're being discharged there, or they know there's a lot of services here. I know Mayor Willie Brown, the ex-mayor of San Francisco, thought that was a big reason, because we have so many social services here that people flock here. So that could be a reason why there are a lot of homeless people. And keep in mind, you don't have to be mentally ill or drug addicted to be homeless. There's an epidemic of people here in the Bay Area who simply just lost their job, or they got evicted and they are now living out of their cars. So what you would say like a normal person, but yet they are still homeless. So I don't want to categorize and generalize that all homeless people are drug addicted or mentally ill, because there are a lot of just regular middle class people in this area losing their job. Maybe they get an injury and they do become homeless. They get evicted. But this goes into my next reason why I do think there are a lot of homeless in San Francisco Bay Area. This more has to do with drug abuse, mental health, is that we are a port city. We have the port of Oakland. San Francisco has a small port. We get imports of both legal and illegal goods. So this is kind of a big high drug trafficking area. So there is high drug trafficking, other things like high prostitution and things of that nature, which I do believe is a big contributing factor to why there are so many homeless. I remember the rapper Too Short in an interview had a theory of why there was so much prostitution and drugs going on in the Bay Area, is because he pointed to the fact of historically we do have a large military presence here. You know, of course, we had the naval shipyards in San Francisco, the shipyards in Oakland, the Air Force Base by Fairfield. You know, you have the Lawrence Livermore Labs, and his theory was that when the military had their off time, they needed to go somewhere to have what we could call fun time, and that's kind of fueled the prostitution and drug trafficking, the intensity of it here. It's very high drug trafficking. And not only high drug trafficking, we do have high acceptance of open drug use, which I do believe is a factor of why there are so many homeless in San Francisco. If you live here, you know about it. Pretty much the state of California stance is to not take punitive measures upon people who sell or use drugs, but rather be more punitive with individuals who are violent. And that's pretty much just due to the criminal justice system being overloaded here in California. We do not have enough space to fit all the mental health people and drug abusers and drug sellers. So we are very permissive towards drug using, drug selling, and I believe if you are letting people just openly use and sell drugs in the street, then you are accommodating to those homeless individuals who are going through a drug addiction. Okay, next reason why I believe there are so many homeless in San Francisco is because our simple acceptance of the fact of the problem. If you live here, you accept it as a day-to-day fact that there will be homeless people. You are accepting it as a reality. So just by the mere fact that we are accepting the problem kind of goes against our motivation to want to fix it. So if we're just going to accept that, hey, there's going to be homeless people, we'll do as much as we can to help them out, but we're just going to accept that it's a problem, then it will never change. If we just accept it as the norm, it will be the norm. So we do need to put it at top priority. And I don't want to bash the city and county or anything like that. This video is not for bashing the government, but even Mayor Breed has acknowledged that affordable housing and homelessness is at the top priority. So it looks like we're just beginning to go in the right direction of prioritizing homeless services, but we really need to make it a main focus and prioritize this issue much more higher, which goes into my next reason why I do believe that there are so many homeless individuals in San Francisco and Bay Area. And again, this is not going to be a video to offer solutions. I'll do a video offering solutions at a later time. This is more to list what I think the issues are. And in my opinion, there is a lack of a coordinated effort to intake people into the shelter system. I'm not sure about well, first I'll compare it to New York. I used to work in New York and they had a great intake system. So basically their intake system was run by the government, and there was an intake center in every borough. Pretty much every homeless individual knew about this intake center. They went there, they got assessed for 30 days and then got all their services and referrals, and then were sent to their shelter. So it was a very streamlined process run by the city government, I believe DHS, Department of Homeless Services. I don't know about San Francisco. I do believe the city is running it, but I know in Oakland, the intake process was contracted out to nonprofits. So actually in New York, they had something called centralized intake, which was what I just described, where the county had to take charge of the intake process, and they had the right to shelter law for the homeless. Which brings me into the fact, one of the main reasons there's a lot of homelessness, not just to go off topic, is because there's not enough shelter beds for the amount of homeless individuals in San Francisco. At least at the time I was working in New York, like 2010, 2011, 12, they did have the capacity, the amount of shelter beds for the amount of homeless people. In San Francisco, we do not have that. So that is another reason we need to have the equal amount of shelter beds to house people as the amount of homeless people, which they're currently, in my opinion, They do not have enough beds here in San Francisco or Alameda County, so we need to build more beds. But going back to coordinated entry and the right to shelter law, New York implemented the right to shelter law again, which gives every homeless individual the right to shelter. I believe Scott Wiener did pass new legislation that was a similar right to shelter law. However, there are not enough shelters. In the intake process, at least what I could see in Alameda County, instead of the local city and county or whatever being in charge of the intake process, they contracted it out to local nonprofits. So it's a very confusing process about how to get into the shelter system. First, I know there's a hotline, and I know there's one in San Francisco. And after talking to a lot of clients, it's pretty much the worse your situation, the higher prioritized you get to go into shelter. But there's currently long wait lists. People could be waiting days, weeks, months to even get into a shelter, which goes back to my fact that there is not enough shelter beds in these two counties. Now, going back to Alameda County, as they give you the hotline or they tell you to go to a certain site. So if you're like 18 to 24 and you live in this part of Oakland, you go to that site. Or if you're a HIV/AIDS client, you go to this site. Or if you were a senior, go to this site. So it's very confusing. New York's was just one place you went to and you got your service. Here, Alameda County, you have to go to a certain site and then you kind of go to the wrong site, then you have to go to another site, and then they say, oh, well, we can't help you, it's a wait list, but maybe you can go to this nonprofit and they could help you. So it was the nonprofits doing this intake, and the local city and government does not do the intake. I believe the local city and government should do the intake because it's much more streamlined. But what happens here in San Francisco and Oakland when you are trying to seek services, in my opinion, it seems like an endless referral cycle. So you say you're homeless, you call the hotline or you go to an agency, they say, oh, we might not be able to help you, but call this other agency. So then you call the other agency and they say, we may or may not be able to help you, but call this other agency. So you're continuously just going in a circle, calling all these agencies, not getting the services you need or perhaps the quality of services you need. So in my opinion, it is very difficult to navigate homeless services in the Bay Area, although I do see the city is adopting coordinated entry because actually HUD is mandating that every county in the nation utilize a coordinated entry system in order to receive homeless services dollars. Okay? I don't want to bash the city because I do believe they are starting to get it and they are going into the direction of coordinated entry, sharing data. You know, there's another issue of that. Before, the city wasn't sharing data from agency to agency. So clients were having to keep going to agencies and keep telling their story over and over again, possibly being traumatized. Now we do have a central data system. So a lot more needs to be done, but I do want to give props to the city for starting that move in the right direction, and we will see if their efforts pay off in the coming years. Okay, another reason why I do believe there is a lot of homeless, and this is because I believe there's too much emphasis on harm reduction. If you don't know what harm reduction is, you could look it up, but it's basically the theory that that you're going to accept people are going to engage in risky behavior, and instead of detour them from that behavior, you will give them tools that will help them mitigate the harm. So for example, you could use a heroin addict. So instead of trying to convince them to get off heroin, we will under the harm reduction model, you would provide them with a clean needle to utilize heroin to accommodate their drug use, but reduce the harm, because when you are giving them the needle, then they have less chances of contracting a disease. And that is the idea of harm reduction. You know, you could also say, for the example, with a heroin addict, give them a clean needle and give them Suboxone, which is a drug that is used to wean people off heroin. Now, I'm not against harm reduction. I'm actually totally for harm reduction. but I do believe that we do need to focus more on recovery and diverting people from engaging in risky behaviors rather than accommodating it. It goes back to how the city is so accommodating of drug use and things of that nature. I think if we were still as accommodating, but equally um, providing services for rehabilitation, which it looks like these new navigation centers are providing these more of these supportive mental health services and substance abuse services. So it looks like we are going in the right direction, but I still believe we are too permissive and accepting of the problem that there is going to be mentally ill people and drug addicted, homeless individuals on the street. And then this goes into containment zones. I believe, the city, and of course it's politics and it's harm reduction, that the city is pretty much, responding to the homeless crisis because people who are not homeless, perhaps the new tech boom, the techie people are coming in and complaining about the homeless population and hoping, we have areas called containment zones in San Francisco, for example, where I am. The Tenderloin is a containment zone. And there is a lot of social services, so I don't think it's a coincidence that all these social services are in this containment zone of the Tenderloin in hopes that homeless individuals will go to these areas, be able to openly use drugs, and be contained in this zone and not be in other neighborhoods of the city, which I actually believe goes against harm reduction. If we're trying to reduce harm, I don't think we should bunch up people in one area. For example, that could, if there's a disease going around in that area where a bunch of homeless people are, then more people could contract that disease. If people are using propane grills and stuff like that and it blows up, and trust me, it's happened in Alameda County, more people can be harmed. If there's a fire in a large area, which has also happened in Alameda County, if there's a fire in an encampment, you are risking more people's life. So I believe that containment zones are actually against harm reduction. And again, we need to build enough beds for people to go in, because what's happening is the more well-off residents are complaining about the homeless individuals. Department of Public Works gets called out along probably with the police and some outreach workers. They clear the camp. They spend all this money to clear the camp, and then they'll just move somewhere else in the city, and then maybe after it's clean, they will move back. So they're wasting a lot of money by just kicking people out of homeless encampments, and then that encampment just moves somewhere else. So instead of it kind of addressing the problem and providing the adequate amount of shelter beds needed, we are moving homeless individuals from this outdoor area to another outdoor area, which I know, again, this goes back to politics and harm reduction from the perspective of the city and county, is that they need to, they're addressing the concern as an eyesore, which I believe they do need to not concern it so much from an eyesore or to please the housed residents of San Francisco, but they need to provide these services to do something for the homeless residents and not just simply get rid of an eyesore. And again, I don't want to go too much into the structure and the funding, but please know that if you do want to complain to your local city government about the homeless services being provided in your city or county, please go to the county, because the majority of money for homeless services does come from HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development. That is a federal agency, and then it gets trickled down to the counties and not the cities. So please remember, the counties are primarily responsible for homeless services. So if you're going to go protest, go address a government agency, please address the county, not the city. Although I do believe that the cities should be putting in as much money and resources as the counties are if we do want to be serious about ending homelessness. Keep in mind, San Francisco is a little unique because we are one city, one county. So we do have a little bit more of a coordinated effort And don't forget, everybody, that don't ever think you are better than a homeless individual, because all it takes is that one injury, that loss of a job, that eviction, and you could become homeless yourself. Anything could happen to anybody. Stay humble. Do not forget that these things can happen to you as a social worker. A lot of social workers think it will never happen to them. Trust me and believe, it has happened to people, and it can happen to anybody. So that is my video about why I think there are a lot of homeless individuals in the San Francisco Bay Area. I will do another video later more about what I think the solutions could be. And that's pretty much it. Reporting live to y'all from San Francisco. Happy belated Thanksgiving. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see y'all next time. Peace.